Hello and welcome and thanks for being here. This video is going to talk about how to balance leg day and running within the same week and within the same program and as dual pursuits. And this is a conversation I have quite often, and it's one of the first challenges most people face when they seek to pursue some type of strength pursuit or hypertrophy pursuit alongside an endurance pursuit. And in this video, there are a few sort of guidelines that I'd like to give you for your programming, as well as to tackle a few limiting beliefs that I think might just be holding you back, and breaking those beliefs might just be the thing that will get you going. So one of the first things we should talk about here is just the idea of load management. And really fundamentally, I would say any good training program that you seek to follow, whether it's a good program or not, is largely based off of the idea of how well load is managed over time. And load management is a very broad and general idea. For the purposes of, or for the idea of training specifically, it can basically be said that different kinds of exercise at different intensities will impose different kinds of load in terms of, whether it's the local tissue or the system at large being stressed, and then how much recovery or time is needed before that tissue or system is stressed again. More broadly speaking, good load management is also going to take into account things like stress from daily life, from work, from relationships, things like that. And really, if you want to manage load most effectively, you're going to take into account all that sort of stuff. That's a bit more biopsychosocial than I want to get, for the purposes of this video. So, in this video, we can just assume, that load management pertains to the different kinds of load that different forms of exercise may impose on your body. So, as I did note here, whether you're strength training your legs, whether you're doing a long run versus a short to moderate distance run, whether you're doing a high intensity run, like high intensity intervals, all of these are going to impose different sorts of load and fatigue onto your body. And understanding the degree of the load imposed on your body by each form of training and the implications for fatigue and recovery are useful when you're drawing up a program, and as a quick little blurb, I'm going to give you some guidelines on the next slide after this to follow. But, if you go on a short to moderate distance run today, for example, that does not mean that you cannot strength train your legs tomorrow or vice versa. I mean, if you do a strength workout for your legs today, that does not mean you can't do a run tomorrow, even if your legs are sore, which that I want to talk about a bit later. But on that note, let's sort of break down the different types of training you might do throughout a week if you are running and strength training your legs, and what your recovery time should look like in between each. And now, again, I was careful to call these guidelines and not hard rules because these aren't going to be perfect timelines for everyone. And there is something to be said, I think, about the higher your aerobic fitness is, your cardiovascular fitness is in general, probably the better your recovery is going to be, and the shorter these time periods can be, and probably the more work you'll be able to handle. But based on the evidence, and there's a specific paper I draw this from that I will link down below if you're interested, these are probably good starting points, and I would use these as your starting point, like I say. And if you think these timelines can be tweaked to better fit your life, your schedule, your current fitness level, etc., then give yourself the freedom to do so. So let's run through these quickly one by one. So high intensity running. So, say for example, you do a workout where you're doing 2 minutes at a 5 out of 10 effort, 2 minutes at a 10 out of 10 effort, and you repeat that 5 times. That's going to hurt. That's going to be some of the most stressful type of training you can impose on your system, at large. Again, you can tweak this as best fit for you. And there is something to be said about, what the actual session looks like, and whether you spend a lot of time at a high intensity or you just get to the high intensity and you get out just for that, quick little experience. But something like 72 hours before using your legs intensely again is probably a good idea. And when I say intensely, just to kind of clear up definitions here, that refers to strength training or another high intensity running workout. So, let's say you do a high intensity run as an interval workout, as I gave an example of before. You do that, let's say on a Saturday. You could probably still do a short to moderate distance run, whatever that means for you, because that's obviously going to be very subjective person to person. But you could do a short to moderate distance run the next day and you will not die. And not just you will not die, but your recovery will very likely not be implicated. Strength training is very similar, but probably needs a little bit less recovery time than the high intensity run workout as depicted before. Again, it depends on what the volume of strength training you're doing is, if it's just a couple sets of legs or if it's a full, all your leg volume in a week. Obviously, this is going to have some variance, but something like 48 hours in between when your legs are used intensely again is a good general starting point. And again, this means whether you're doing strength training for your legs or if you're doing high intensity running for your legs. So again, this is just 48 hours in between intense training. So if you strength train on a Monday, your legs, you can do a short to moderate distance run on a Tuesday. And I just realized I didn't mention this, or for a prolonged period of time. So that really denotes a long run. Again, a long run is very subjective person to person, but it really, you can consider a long run anything in which your glycogen stores are being depleted, where you're really hitting that feeling of, sort of, let's say, mental fatigue after a run, something like that. So now let's talk about long running. Long running, not going to be as stressful on the tissue or the system at large from a recovery standpoint as high intensity running or strength training. Typically most evidence suggests that something like waiting 24 hours before your legs are really used again at all is probably a best bet. So, really, if you are doing a long run on a Sunday, you probably can do a high intensity run or a strength training for your legs session on a Monday, the day after. And then short to moderate distance runs really can be programmed wherever you want. The only recommendation that I would say is, it should be separated from your strength training or your high intensity running by at least 3 hours. For most people, that's not a very hard thing to do, but it just shouldn't be combined into the same session as a strength training. Apart from that, you can toss those short to moderate distance runs wherever you want. And really, that is a pretty good little hack to combining leg day as far as strength training goes and running, because in many ways your total miles per week, accumulated throughout the week, is one of the more important factors when it comes to building your running performance and improving your running over time. And because these short to moderate distance runs will meaningfully contribute to your total miles across the week, and they are not going to be very fatiguing, require a lot of recovery, nor are they going to have many, adverse implications for your recovery from other more intense type of training. They really are useful to just kind of, build your running here and there throughout the week. Granted, a good running program overall is probably going to have some type of high intensity day, whether that's a tempo run, whether that's intervals, etc. It's probably going to have some type of long day where you're really kind of pushing that aerobic capacity. But honestly, if all you had was short to moderate distance runs throughout the week, that is probably enough for most people to see meaningful progress in their performance in running. So just to reiterate, using these short to moderate distance runs liberally throughout the week should be something you should seek to do to most effectively improve your running and strength performance over time. Now, cross training is something that I like to bring up because, especially for people who are newer to endurance, it really can be a useful little trick to add into your programming. And cross training can be defined as using some modality of exercise other than running for the purpose of improving running. Cycling is typically the most common application of this because, one, it is still specific to the lower body in general. And yes, there is something to be said about your upper body's contribution as a counterweight during running, but running is most certainly a lower body predominant exercise. Nevertheless, though, this can be done with any means of, let's say, non-impact type of aerobic training. So that could be a rower, that could be an airdyne. It could also mean something like swimming or a ski erg, but ideally it would be some sort of aerobic modality that does incorporate your lower body to some meaningful degree. The reason you might want to do these is because they tend to be less fatiguing, particularly from a recovery standpoint, than running. And that's largely because there is no impact to these types of modalities. And the impact itself can be uniquely fatiguing compared to other modes of endurance training. And again, especially this is true probably for newer people to running or endurance at large. And I do have another article and video discussing how to begin running as a seasoned lifter. And this is something I talk about. The greater your aerobic base level of fitness, the more likely your recovery is going to be better, and the easier it very well may be to progress your running. And so if you can build your aerobic base with less fatigue using something like cross training, then that very likely will be to your advantage. Now, again, there is a very notable degree of tissue tolerance that is required for good running performance. And for example, if you are going for a run and you feel it, let's say more in your knees than you do in your heart and your cardiovascular system at large, then your limiting factor is probably the tissue tolerance of your knees and not your aerobic system. And these cross training interventions are not going to cover that tissue tolerance aspect of running. But as long as you're doing some running throughout the week, you probably will still see the benefits and improvements there. So the rest of this video is going to be a little bit less tactical and what I would say a bit more, not mindset, because that almost comes off as a little bit cringe. But I want to tackle a few limiting beliefs that might just be holding you back that just very well are likely not true. So something that is not uncommon when someone begins to pursue running and strength training in the same program is a slight transient dip in performance. And that is probably going to be true whether you are a runner engaging in strength training for the first time or if you are a lifter engaging in running for the first time. And this would probably happen if you made any sort of meaningful or significant change to your programming, across the week at large. And I say that to say that it's probably not unique to, running or endurance in general. But in my experience, and again, I say in my experience in the slide there to say that this isn't necessarily a super, let's say, evidence-based thing. It's just my experience working with people and with myself. Usually this will last just about 2 to 3 weeks. And then you'll kind of see, your strength and your endurance or whatever the case was normalize, and your rate of progress will also normalize. In regard to the interference effect at large, or the idea that aerobic training or cardiovascular training will have adverse implications for your gains, I do have another article and video tackling that, which I will link down below if you are interested in that. And just to give you the cliff notes here, it's for the most part a myth as long as you don't do them in the same session. But if you want to see more details as far as why I say that, I'll link that down below. And just again, to reiterate this point, the greater your aerobic capacity is, likely the greater your recovery will be, and therefore the less perturbations you will see in your training as you make changes here and there. This is another thing that I think is worth reiterating, that if your legs are sore from a strength training workout for your legs you did on Monday, you can run on a Tuesday, as long as it's not a run that is going to have significant demands in terms of recovery, or if it's one that is going to be adversely implicated from your legs being sore. So for example, if your legs are sore, then your ability to perform highly in a high intensity interval training session is probably going to be decreased, and then therefore the stimulus you get in terms of adaptation from that session might be decreased. But a short to moderate distance run is probably going to be not affected at all. It's not going to affect your recovery from that strength training workout at all. And so for the purpose of getting your total weekly volume increased throughout the week, it's a very helpful thing to do. And lastly, I just want to reiterate the idea that suboptimal is always better than nothing. And if you overthink and you're in the pursuit of hyper perfection, that may hold you back more than anything else. You can have a pretty bad program, but as long as you are lifting some, running some, eating enough, and sleeping enough, you probably still will see progress in both. It's just a matter of optimizing things from there. But there's a lot of room for error here where you can still see progress. And again, I don't know who you are unless you're a current client watching this, but the guidelines that I presented in this video might work out perfectly for you. You might need to adjust them slightly to better fit you and your life and your schedule and your current fitness level, etc. So, give yourself that freedom to experiment and find out what works best for you. And I promise eventually you will. So I'm going to end this video here. I hope you found that somewhat helpful or interesting or something in between. If you have any sort of comments, questions, concerns, or anything of the like, comment below and I will get back to you as soon as I possibly can. And I will speak to you soon.